Welcome everybody to the Housing Committee for Wednesday, January 3rd. The first thing on our agenda is always the public comment. That is when people are invited to come forward with comments that are not related to today's agenda. Do we have any public comment?
I believe the only person online who's from member of the public is Jean Hopkins, and of course there's Mike Isham here. So
Basically here to observe and listen. I live in Burlington, but I spent the first 3.5 years of my life in Vermont in Williston. So.
Great, well, glad you're here. All right, next up we have to review the December 6th meeting minutes.
and because we don't have quorum tonight, I'm gonna suggest that you put that off
Okay.
until the following meeting, and then you can approve those minutes.
Terrific, okay. So good, let's get to the fun stuff, the panel discussion. We wanted to get some insight from neighboring housing committees as we start this work to understand what you've learned and what your recommendations are. So we have Pam here from the Shelburne Housing Committee and Leslie from the Winooski and previously from the South Burlington Housing Committees. And SJ, you're online. Hello. So is it worth going around maybe and letting each of you have a few minutes just to talk about how your committees got going and what your recommendations are to us as we get started?
Sure.
Sorry,
Good evening, I'm Pam Brangan. I'm currently the chair of the Shelburne Housing Committee. As a volunteer in the town of Shelburne, I also, my day job, I work for Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So land use and transportation planning is a part of my life, both, work and personal, I guess. I've been on the Shelburne Housing Committee since it began in 2015 or 2016. And the committee was born out of a planning commissioner who was stepping off of the planning commission and was recommending that the planning commission could really use some more information like statistics and just background on the situation of housing in the town of Shelburne. And the commission itself doesn't, has enough other things going on that they weren't really able to get that information. So they decided to create a housing committee, and they put it out on Front Porch Forum, looking for people who are interested in analysis and housing and, whatever. So a bunch of us said, hey, we'll do that. And our very first task was to create a housing booklet, which we did. We pulled a lot of resources from the state, from the census, from the town, and really, we didn't create anything new. We just really brought it all into one document that is available for anyone to view. It's on the Housing Committee's website, which is on the town website. And we've updated it 3 times. We've included, I should say, my day job, I make maps. So I also always look to how I can incorporate a map into some of this work. So there's an online map that's linked to the housing booklet that shows, housing over the decades, so you can kind of see where housing has grown up in Shelburne over the years. And we've added other data to that so people could see where zoning districts are, where the bike and pedestrian paths are, where the conservation land is. So, kind of brings everything into focus for folks. So that was our first big task. And then after we did that, the planning commission asked us, we're really a subset of the planning commission. So we take our direction from them. And they've asked us to do a few other tasks here and there. We've made changes, suggested changes to the zoning. One was around accessory dwelling units, and then after we got that all approved, the state made changes that basically negated the. I mean,
we've been learning about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was really proud that we were able to do that and got the housing, the planning commission to approve of it, and we changed the zoning, and then it was like a year later, the state said, oh, everyone needs to allow this as a permitted use, so, it was a good exercise for us, it helped us learn, how to, make changes, suggested changes to the planning commission. And then other things we've done is try to educate ourselves like you guys are doing here. We've talked with other housing committees. We've brought experts from the state. We've brought in developers to talk with us. We've brought in CHT to talk to us to help us understand, what is keeping those houses that are affordable to like a young couple or housing for somebody who's aging out of their big, 4-bedroom house. How do we encourage more of that? So that's been a goal of ours. It's a continual goal. We continue to invite different developers in to hear from them on, what are the holdups, what's causing the problem. I'm probably taking more time than you wanted, but most recently, well, two things are going on in Shelburne right now. One is that we are doing a complete zoning rewrite. So the planning commission has asked housing and all the other committees to really get involved. So that's one thing that we're paying close attention to right now is the zoning rewrite and how it pertains to housing. The other piece is we did, the town had a Shelburne Forward Together event, which was run by VCRD, thank you.
Council on Rural Development.
Yes, and out of that came 3 task forces, and one of those task forces is on affordable housing. And so we now went from a committee of 7 to a committee of 7 with a task force that of probably another 20 or so people that are interested in having Shelburne have more diverse housing options. And so we are in the beginning stages of figuring out what we can have that task force do to help us help our cause. Yeah, sorry.
So these 27 people are all from the town? or-
Yeah. With the Shelburne Forward Together was really amazing. The first event, there was 3 different events that took place, and the first one had over 200 residents come to it, and it was the time to talk about what's great about Shelburne and what isn't great about Shelburne, what can we improve on, and then from that, there was another meeting that was probably a little less, there weren't 200 people, but there were still quite a few people. And we voted on, there was like probably 20 some odd ideas that came out of that first event on, that ranging from housing to economic development and everything in between. And then in the third, I guess it was, the third one the second one we voted on at the third, I can't remember now. So
Right.
we basically winnowed down from 3 or 4 pages of suggestions down to 7 that were voted on and down to 3 task forces. Yeah, it was a really cool process.
Any questions for Pam before we move on?
So the events were about getting people from the town to come in and interact?
Yeah, and
UCRD has this whole community visit process, so a community like Williston, any community, it doesn't have to be rural, although that's their name, but they have this like community visit process that they'll do like 3 or 4 towns a year. And so if the town, I don't exactly know how the towns get selected, but I think you would just express interest to BCRD. And then they will come and meet with your city leaders and and help structure. They actually like have this really kind of honed in system for
It's quite amazing.
building, like, I mean, they did, yours was, well, I've been to a couple and Shelburne's was extremely well attended. You also did like a lovely job of like having food and there was music and it was just like
Seems
a,
to be key.
and it was a beautiful night in the
Fiddlehead
summer.
beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might have been the draw, I'm not sure.
It was really very, very nice, and it just brought out so many people.
I
It was
will
amazing.
say that I believe the town, and I don't even know who inquired with them on it, but the ask was out there for a long time. Like, we were on a list for, it took a while, and I believe that first night when they were talking about they've done almost 100 towns throughout the state. But yeah, it's very well done.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. That was the latest one that I've been to, but they have a whole system, and it is like a series of maybe three dates,
Yeah.
like within like a 3 or 4 month period. They don't want it to stretch too long, but they kind of like, they have like.
Is that similar to what we?
It's different,
Okay.
yeah, it's different, but. I don't know.
I mean, sort of sound.
But we didn't have mind meetings with everybody there. Yeah.
Fiddlehead.
All right, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, have been on the housing committee in Winooski for a good long time, since it started. I think that was about couple years before the pandemic, maybe 2017. So been on the Winooski Housing Committee for a good long time, still on that committee, as a non-resident. So I actually I try not to vote. I'm more of a advisory member. I can vote, but they often don't need me. They have to, in terms of like the vote. So, so I participate as an alternate and as an advisor on that committee. That committee, is not affiliated directly with the planning commission. It was created by the city council and it gets its priorities largely from the city council, although it's a little bit of back and forth. The committee will suggest certain things and the city council will set annual priorities, and then the committee creates a work plan. That's kind of similar to how it works in South Burlington. I just left that committee. I had been on that one also since the beginning, like in 2015. So I've been on it a really good long time. That committee is also like Winooski, not associated with the planning commission directly, and has its priorities now are pretty well set by the city council, but again, with back and forth between the housing committee. And the committee will set a work plan. In South Burlington, the work plan has not been it's been difficult to stick to it. There've been like a lot of things that came up, like the city didn't anticipate a lot of I guess we didn't anticipate the issues that would become important in South Burlington in a couple of the recent years. So then the committee kind of got sidetracked and the city council would go off and spend a lot of time like creating short-term rental regulations. That was not really in the work plan, but it became a priority for some of the folks involved. And so that was, that became something that the committee helped with a bit, although that was really more led by a city council member. So it's been really interesting to see those committees set priorities and how they do their work. They both had they're similar in terms of they both have housing trust funds. Neither has a recurring source of funding for the housing trust fund. Both of those housing trust funds were set up during the time that the housing committees were in action. But they both of those are funded by the Williston the Winooski Housing Trust Fund is funded by it was like a chunk of money that had been generated by fees, I think from their density bonus. I'm not exactly sure, but it was like $348,000 that they had designated for housing that was generated. They had a
Lou or something.
I guess, I know now that's what, I think it is, it's from a fee in lieu payment, and I don't exactly understand why, why that money was generated, but it's not likely that very much more will be created in that way. So that committee has come up with some ways of spending that money, to help accomplish the affordable housing goals in Winooski. And then in South Burlington's, the city council's been making like one-time appropriations to the Housing Trust Fund pretty regularly each year, small amount, so 300,000, 100,000, something like that. And then the committee, that town has a separate Housing Trust Fund committee, and they'll typically take applications and make awards of that money for like gap funding for affordable rental housing development. Like,
What do you mean by gap funding?
gap funding is the way that affordable rental housing is developed these days is typically that a big chunk of the money will come from one place, like the low income housing tax credit, or one of the big funding streams that that's available, and then there's a gap. And the developer needs to figure out how to pay for the remainder of the total development costs of building the building. And so some of those local housing trust funds can be an important source of that gap funding, and can help get the town also invested and involved in the development of affordable rental housing.
So in that situation, does a developer approach the town and say, we have a deal that's 99% of the way here and there's just this piece?
Mhm.
And they pulled in a bunch of different parties and the last piece is town.
Yeah,
Or
the
the
developers usually takes a multiple
Yeah.
multiple funding sources to cover all of the costs of building rental housing these days, especially when you are doing affordable housing, which is required to charge rents below a certain level. So your rent stream is limited, so you're not gonna get the rental revenue that you might otherwise get if you didn't have those restrictions. So you really have to cover, you're not gonna get that money from rent in the operating system. You have to kind of pay as much as you can of those total development costs upfront with public funds, including local funds. So that went off a long tangent with
Yeah.
housing trust funds.
Well, how much, in South Burlington, how much did the housing committee have to do with the UVM affordable housing that they did for visiting nurses or whatever? That's
Yeah, that was really not something that the housing committee there, in both places, I think is supportive of additional housing that's going to be developed, and almost always like finds out what they can about the proposed development, and then if it's almost always, it's something that is very advantageous to housing affordability in town, and so the committee will support the development, will encourage the city council to approve things, and the planning commission to approve things, and DRB to approve things. But we weren't, like, that committee wasn't part of why that happened. That happened because the town had created like zoning that allowed for that kind of development right there in that location, and the property was available, and they were to buy it and develop it, actually with a lot of funding from UVM. I don't believe there's other public money in there, so that is really kind of, I would call that like, it's not market rate housing, it's very unusual, it's employer assisted housing for the UVM community, and that's becoming more discussed as the housing markets become tighter, employers are wanting to do something to help be able to recruit staff and, so are looking into ways they can support development of additional
Yeah,
homes in town.
absolutely. Well,
Did
that's
either one of them do a community development block grant at all?
Did they apply for community
Yeah.
development block grant? I don't know. One of the UVM buildings?
Or in Winooski, anyone?
Oh, yeah, so there, that is another good source of that gap funding that we were talking about. There, is the community development block grant.
Now, in defining affordable housing, I think of it as two types, rental units and owner occupied units. Is there like a ratio of what we try to, attain when we do affordable housing and are both of them you have to have different plans for either one of them? Affordable housing, rental versus owner occupied.
Yeah, it kind of depends on like what your town's goals are and what where the needs are most serious. Like if there are some towns in Vermont that don't have many rental housing choices, so creating choices and opportunities is advantageous. And so, in a town like Williston, I think, I'm trying to remember, y'all I think are pretty much like the state in terms of the portion of the units that are rented and the portion of the units that are owner occupied. Do you recall?
No,
You're
the
more-
ratio is really skewed towards owner
Owner
occupied.
occupied.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in Vermont, it's been that way for a long time, like 72% of all of the homes in Vermont are owner occupied, but it might be even higher in Williston.
Yeah.
And so, Williston's done a nice job of creating some opportunities to develop additional rental housing here to help create some more, choices for people who aren't ready to buy a house and don't have the, income perhaps to afford a mortgage and all the costs that are associated with that.
Most of our rental is pretty high, but.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, you all don't have a whole lot of this, of
No.
subsidized housing.
It's almost all senior housing. What we do
Mhm.
have.
So, I know that, SJ has to leave at 7,
Oh.
so I want to give.
Yes, please.
Make sure that she has a chance to talk about Jericho.
Sorry, everybody. I have I have another Jericho meeting that starts at 7. So I'm Sarah Jane, but I use SJ and she, her pronouns. I've been on the Jericho Affordable Housing Committee since the pandemic, I guess. Our committee was started by a local resident, Bob Robbins, who is at the time, I believe, was a member of the board of the Champlain Housing Trust, and also lives in a Champlain Housing Trust home in Jericho, one of 4, I think, that we have. And he went to the select board in, I believe it was 2019, and asked that they form a committee. And the select board said, sure. And so we answered to the select board that, but the select board is really hands off. And so we've kind of spent some time charting our own course and doing a lot of kind of self-education. Our members are all volunteers and few have any expertise in the housing area. I joined in 2020 because the committee was forming. They kept posting on Front Porch Forum, asking for volunteers. And when the pandemic happened, everything moved online. And I have a young family, and so I can't go to town hall to attend meetings, but I can certainly sit on a Zoom, and you may see little ones running around when bedtime starts in a little bit. And so I don't know anything about housing. I work at UVM as a researcher, so I can definitely do data analysis and write reports. But I figure, you give me marching orders and I'll do the work and I'll learn. And that's kind of how most of our committee started. We're all inexperienced in the world of housing and are kind of doing our own work, attending conferences, attending webinars. And we spent the first year talking to a lot of other housing committee members, just like you are, to try and understand what everybody else is doing, and what lessons we could learn along the way. I became chair. When did Rob leave us? Boy, maybe it was 2020 or 2021. It was early on. I think it's been a couple of years now. And really, once we got done educating ourselves, our first step was educating the public and initiating a conversation. And as a scientist, anecdotes are not data. And anecdotes are really subjective. And so one of the first things we did was conduct a housing needs assessment, and used housingdata.org. I don't know if any of you have experience with that. Oh my gosh, I spent hours in there playing and just asking all sorts of questions and compiling a bunch of data that I brought to the select board, I brought to the planning commission. We try to talk about at table at town meeting, to say that, the things that we've all kind of been feeling and sensing are true, which are that Jericho has actually been building the last 5 years at a much higher rate than we had in the past couple of decades. And again, for us, that's like, a jump from maybe 10 houses to 20 something or 30 something, or units, I should say. But almost all of those are large, very expensive homes on large lots, and are just completely inaccessible. And so I appreciate the gentleman who asked about affordability earlier. I think for a town like Jericho, when we're talking about affordable, we're not just talking about subsidized housing. We really are talking about housing choice and housing diversity and economically diverse neighborhoods. And so while we do want to increase the amount of subsidized housing that is available in Jericho, we're really pushing more towards trying to retain the naturally occurring affordable housing that we have, meaning housing that's affordable to median income households and less, and building more options for median and lower. And so one of the things that was really surprising, I mean, it's not as surprising when you start, I don't know if all of you, when you started doing this, if now everywhere I go, every time I walk around, I'm like, oh, an ADU, oh, a duplex, oh, look at how they're using that land. Oh, look at that setback. And so like you kind of get nerdy and start walking out on stuff. And but one of the things when you walk around is we've got a lot of split level ranches. We've got a lot of, we have a few condos and townhouses that, my daughter's best friend, when they moved here before they had kids, they started in the condo. And then once they had their daughter, and they had saved a little money and had built some equity, then they were able to move into a split level ranch. And whether they stay there or move into something bigger, but they were able to do that in Jericho, right? And folks haven't been able to do that for the last 10 years or so. And so trying to find those houses. We also have a lot of folks, we are, one of the things that came out of the housing needs assessment was that we are a much older community than we ever used to be. And part of that is because a lot of folks want to stay in Jericho and would love to downsize, but there isn't an option. And so they're going to sit on that home, even though it's got 3 extra bedrooms that they don't need. So pulling these kinds of things together and having these conversations, those kinds of conversations aren't scary in the same way that saying, we're gonna build an apartment complex in the middle of Jericho. May be scary. I'm not saying that's a bad thing and we shouldn't do it, but in starting to have these conversations with folks, starting to talk about those kinds of things, asking people to think about their own housing journey and where did you first live and what was your progression and what about your kids that would love to move back so that, you know, Nana can babysit and this, that, and the other thing. Having those kinds of conversations so that because if you don't, what we've learned is if you don't provide examples, and if you don't kind of start talking about things as they relate to the people themselves and their stories and their family stories, then all of a sudden their minds immediately go to some of the worst stigmas and myths and cliches and images and all of these things that that shut the conversation down. The other part about having a conversation that's been important for a town like Jericho, but I think also in looking at some of the news in Williston, I think y'all are thinking along these lines, or there's possibility for these conversations, is reaching out to the Conservation Committee. And we also have a really active land trust. And reaching out to those folks and trying to form partnership with them so that we're not battling. It's not an us against them. We're saying, you know, housing is a huge issue. Conservation, responding to natural disasters, protecting our wildlife, huge issue. These two things, if we strategize and plan and work together, we can make specific choices about where is best to preserve and conserve and where is best to build that will have the least amount of impact. One of the things that has been the most difficult part of that conversation is that traditionally Jericho has leaned on 10-acre zoning as the way that we're going to protect and preserve and conserve land. I don't know that the data supports that as the best way to protect wildlife and natural resources, but that has been either the thinking or the explanation for it. And man, nothing makes housing less affordable than having to buy 10 acres. And so, you know, those, but we need to be able to build those relationships and that trust before we can even broach the topic of thinking about what is 10-acre zoning really doing. And so reaching out to conservation and land trust and doing that in a really public way, having joint meetings or having speakers that can speak to both topics, that, you know, the public is invited and they rarely attend, but you can point back to the, you know, the video recording or the notes or the whatever, or that land trust member who came, who's really trusted in the community, when they go talk to their neighbors and say, hey, we met with affordable housing the other day and they're thinking X, Y, and Z. So that has been really important. Reaching out, building relationships, and then educating with data that's grounded in fact, but you can tie into personal relatable experiences. So to start a conversation where everybody kind of, not that no one's defenses are up, you know, that you can actually have a conversation. So in terms of, other than the housing needs assessment, some of the other kind of actionable deliverables, one of them was similar to, I'm sorry, the woman from Shelburne, maybe, pulling together resources about ADUs. And again, like we didn't invent anything, but compiling resources about how to navigate ADUs. And it is a little different for each community. We don't have sewer, and we have some public water, but we really have very little infrastructure. And so it does look different than the resources that we pulled from South Burlington or from the Shelburne website, which I used to kind of help guide us. But our situation is much different. And so kind of compiling those resources, one of the things that we did for that was to conduct a survey of folks in Jericho who are either own an ADU or live in an ADU, and survey them to try and get a feeling for what is building, owning, living in an ADU like right now? What were some of the obstacles? Did you run into any problems when you went to town hall to get the permit? And then also, again, kind of community building. Would you be willing to be a resource for a neighbor who wants to build an ADU? Would you be willing to, to swap emails so that if they've got a question or some concerns that they can reach out to you about? And that was one of the first ways I think that the housing committee really got on people's radar, because we were conducting a survey. And again, like that felt like a non-threatening way to start a conversation and make our presence known. The big thing that we just finished about a year or two ago, I started attending the Planning Commission meetings regularly, and formed a close working relationship with the chair of the Planning Commission. And we started putting together a housing target resolution. And this is a little tricky because it's a resolution. It's not like a binding thing, but it is setting some targets that ultimately the select board, but that the town will be held accountable to. And the idea of the resolution is to really, the targets are really meant to be a tool to help us organize and strategize, because I don't know, it feels like the work that we're doing is just this kind of amorphous blob, and how do you wrap your arms around it, and where do you hang your hat, and how, and so we wanted to have some concrete goals that we could be not just working towards, but so that we could measure any kind of progress. If we change zoning and we do X, Y, and Z, do we see a bump in the number of ADUs over the next 5 years? And so it's really kind of a rubric to help us both plot a course and agree on the direction that we want to go in, and measure the success or impact that we're having against. And so that was a big project, which would be its whole other conversation. It was a good one, and a complicated one, and a lot of thought went into it. It was adopted and passed by the select board. And we just, the Planning Commission just finished the rewrite of our town plan, which was just adopted not even a month ago now, which includes the housing resolution. And in order to, it was nice to have that housing resolution adopted by the select board, because when we pushed for some changes, some pretty drastic changes to our town plan, to really improve and champion housing choice and diversity in Jericho, every time we got pushback, we could go back to that resolution and say, these are the goals that we all agreed to, and that we put a lot of effort into. We're not going to be able to achieve that if we don't do X, Y, and Z. So it provided a bit of a permission structure, I think, to really push the town plan in a direction that was more housing friendly, and less restrictive and exclusive. And so the next push, then we did the resolution. I think we had a really big impact on the town plan. Now that town plan is adopted, now it's time to tackle the regulations to make some of those things possible. And so that'll be the next kind of joint partnership between our committee and the Planning Commission. And then the last thing that I'll mention is kind of getting back to community outreach. My big hope for the next year is to think intentionally about crafting a real YIMBY campaign. And what does that look like? And I think we've put in a lot of effort building relationships and building trust and, getting our face out there. But in the same way that the first 2 years that I was on this committee, I had no idea what I was doing and how we were going to move anything forward and what success even looked like. Because it is just this weird, it's not, Jericho isn't going to build a huge complex and then say, okay, we're done. We added 100 housing units. We don't have the infrastructure, the appetite. We're just not the town for that. And so trying to figure out how do we kind of make an impact. And so I think that my neighbors are also interested in participating in figuring out a way to kind of make an impact and figuring out how they all recognize, or many of them recognize, that there's a problem. Many of them are invested in solving the problem, if nothing else, because they want their grandchild next door. And so if we've started to educate and we've started to build some buy-in. And so now I think we really need to figure out how to kind of capitalize on that and move that forward so that when we do have some projects coming down the pipe that are going to be a bit of a shock to the system, that we've got a cohort of folks that are willing to stand up at a DRB meeting and say, yes, I want that multifamily housing unit. Yes, that is part of the character of Jericho. And so we need to start, I think, building that coalition now. And so some of this is something that I don't have fully realized, but some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of a YIMBY campaign, other than just kind of like having it be a thing, one of the big things we've been noticing is that a lot of the PUDs that come through in front of our DRB have HOAs and covenants attached to them, and every single one of them excludes ADUs, has a minimum square footage, require a minimum square footage. In one case, it was 3,000 for any home. Another case, 2,000. And then also equity issues, like you're not allowed to have a company vehicle in your driveway. So my 7 o'clock meeting is with the DEI committee. So, but anyway, so I do think that one of the things that we can do is that neighbors currently can do. A lot of us are in HOAs because we have no infrastructure. So I'm on a shared well with my neighbors. And so we have a set of bylaws because we have to legally for our water. And so those bylaws, when they were written, just happened to also include all of these extra little things about chickens and laundry lines and X, Y, and Z. And so one of the things I think that all of our neighbors can do is say, are you in an HOA? Have you actually read the covenant? Is there any language in there that would, not only is there any language in there that's exclusionary and is an equity issue, but also is there language in there that prohibits an ADU, whether that's legal or not now after the recent legislation, I don't know. But the 3,000 square foot minimum, are you kidding? And take a look at that and really think about, what does that mean? Who does that exclude? Why are you doing that? How can you amend that? And just doing that gives our neighbors an action item that they can go do, that they can, you know, kind of dip their toe in these waters. Again, trying to build some coalitions, some relationships, so that when we do have to have some really difficult conversations, we can have them on friendly terms. And we've got more voices, hopefully, at the table, that are speaking on behalf of housing for people, instead of shutting down a duplex, God forbid.
Yes,
You're doing some great stuff, SJ.
thank you very much.
Trying, but thank you.
When you talk about communication, I mean, beyond communicating with other boards and other commissions and that, have you done anything on Front Porch Forum or had public meetings or anything like that? I guess that's a question to all of you, but
Yeah.
maybe first SJ.
One of the first things that I did when I became chair, and this was, it started out really as just me flailing because I had no idea what I was doing. But then it became really a really critical piece, was reaching out to some of the biggest landowners in town, some of the old time developers, you know, who built the neighborhood over there, or you know, who run the trucks that, you know, dump the concrete or whatever, reaching out to them one-on-one and saying, I will buy you a cup of coffee. I am new to this world. I am new to new to housing. Sit down and tell me what you think I should know, what you want me to know, what your problems have been. If you were running this, you know, I don't have any reason for it to be me as chair, but here I am. So if it was you who actually has some expertise or some history here, what would you be doing? And again, that was really me flailing, but it ended up being super helpful because it was relationship building. And as someone, I've been in this town for 10 years now, but, you know, was buried under babies for a while, and also was just not participating because I couldn't until Zoom. You know, I'm a fresh face. I don't have any of the history, you know, of this family warring with I'm from a small town, so I live and breathe the drama of the small town, but I don't come with any of that baggage. And so, you know, I was able to engage with folks who have felt really disillusioned and really frustrated because they feel like they have some ideas and some solutions, but they've been, you know, wronged by the town or have this negative history. And so no one will listen to them anymore, or whatever the gripe is. And that's all been really useful. And again, has meant that when we do get into some of these touchy situations, I can talk to them, and I can, you know, try to bridge this group of folks with this group of folks who haven't spoken to each other for the last 10 years, at least not spoken without raising their voices. So that was one of the big things. Front Porch Forum, I still haven't mastered how to productively use. I use Front Porch Forum to advertise speakers that are coming, to disseminate the survey results, or the latest, you know, report that we've put together, to direct people to the website. What I have ended up doing is engaging people one-on-one who post with really strong opinions, and we'll reach out to them directly and not engage publicly. And I don't know that that's right, because I want the public to see the other side, but I don't want to engage in the back and forth, and it devolves. And so I don't know the right answer there. The other thing I will say too is not relying on the typical, you know, we got a booth at the farmer's market. That is fantastic. Tabling at town meeting, fantastic. Attending other committees, gatherings, whether it's a meeting, which is important for other reasons, but you know, the Energy Task Force does great lecture series, and going there and communicating with, there is always a housing connect. And so, you know, going to people where they are is much more successful than trying to bring people to you. Although that's important, and we're doing that work too.
I want to give Monica a chance to, because you're on this committee. Did you see? Monica, did you want to ask any questions or anything?
You know, I'm
Any-
really interested in kind of how, you know, seeking out alternative investments, and kind of, I think it was Leslie who touched on the gap, and using the trust fund to do that, and just you know, coming to the table with some ideas that are inspiring to people, and not so much coming from a place of coming with concerns, more coming with answers to existing concerns. um you know, I think Williston has a very different landscape as far as rental, and the builders and the construction companies involved, that I think than Jericho or Shelburne, maybe not Winooski, but maybe closer to that. But yeah, just kind of I think obviously, like, getting people on board, like SJ was saying, is the main ingredient to a lot of the things that we'll be doing. And maybe not so much working with the financials of things, but I think a lot of people do worry about how things will be achieved. So I don't know if maybe kind of, if anyone has any suggestions for you know, public-private partnerships, alternative investment sources, and kind of more innovative ways to kind of push forward the agenda of you know, creating housing, and not, you know, retaining housing obviously like a great idea. But I think with, you know, the things that we've seen with our um housing needs assessment, and you know, the folks who can't afford to live in Williston, the folks that work here but can't live here, yeah, just kind of funneling some of that obvious money that does exist into helping people stay here. So yeah, just, I guess
Yeah.
my brain always goes to the money.
It's a good question. It's a good direction for the brain to go, and Shelburne has definitely been talking about the public-private partnership, and the housing task force actually has two of those task force members are major employers in town. There's, you know, somebody from those major employers are on the task force and are interested in, you know, at creating some workforce housing, and the public-private partnership. I don't have any answers yet. I just feel encouraged that we've got these folks on this, in this housing task force, and are interested in having these conversations. And we are actively looking at properties in town that could potentially, you know, if we can convince somebody to maybe lower the sale price, or, you know, like, and, you know, talking about building those relationships, SJ, I think it's another opportunity for us with so many folks on this task force. Somebody might know someone who is selling a piece of land that could talk to them about, you know, do you really need to sell your property for $1.7 million when it's, you know, 2 acres? And you know, is it really, can we come to some arrangement where maybe you're feeling like some community good? And so I'm hopeful that we can build some of those relationships that SJ mentioned, and definitely, you know, trying to find a way to get some housing built. And we do feel like the public-private is gonna be one of the answers for us. unfortunately, I don't have the magic, how to make it happen, other than I feel like our door is starting to open for that in Shelburne. Yeah, I wanted to, there was something else I was gonna say in relation, and I dropped, I forgot what that was. Go ahead.
When you think of it, interrupt me, but I guess I wanted to just offer that there are a lot of innovative funding sources available if a community has a development option or opportunity, and if the community wants to help that development opportunity serve low-income households, then there's one set of funding streams that you would be eligible to, that you could consider if you're gonna serve folks that are making 60% of the area median income or less. But if you wanted people who are making more like middle income to be able to live there, then a different set of funding sources are available. And they didn't used to exist, but now they do, because we're not able to build housing that's affordable for middle income households right now, because the costs of development are too high and the demand is high. And so, so we have some programs out there now that help us develop and pay for housing that's serving middle income households on the ownership and the rental housing side. So at the FHFA's website, there's more information about what we used to call the missing middle programs. We're kind of shifting that, because that's not really the right use of the term missing middle. That really is like an architecture type, doesn't really have anything to do with cost. But these middle income housing programs that have just been started and funded mostly by the state of Vermont at this point in time. So it's little pots of money that are available, but they'll require a developer to make it happen, and the community to help, the municipality to help facilitate the other pieces and parts that go along with it.
But are you saying that if a town has a resolution like SJ talked about, that we want, X amount of middle income housing, that's our town goal, that would help state level, funding to come
Yeah,
forward, or it would be it would be a good signal to them that the town's committed, or is?
Yeah, that's a good start. And then there are gonna be you're gonna need a developer,
Yeah.
like somebody who is going to develop the housing. So that's like SJ was saying, she started meeting and having coffee with the local developers, and that's a great way for the municipality to become just a little more linked to some of the people who can make these things happen. And then, we're not that big a state. We have a pretty small pot of, pretty small pot of developers in each town that have experience there. And a lot of times the municipalities, regulations and permitting processes are so complicated that like a developer will figure South Burlington out, and then they'll just stay there because that took, like years to learn the ins and outs of building in South Burlington or in Winooski or somewhere else. So they'll kind of get their expertise in certain communities. So learning who is a home builder in your area, that's super helpful. We have a really small core of nonprofit developers like Champlain Housing Trust and Cathedral Square Corporation. There are a few others. There's a couple of for-profit developers that are doing some affordable housing these days, but again, they tend to stay in the communities that they have some experience in. But making those connections and then tapping into the developers and the municipality can help, help open up funding streams that can help close those gaps in the math.
And also talking with your larger employers in town can be helpful too, because chances are they're struggling to keep their staff at the level that they need it. And part of the problem is because the people can't live, they can't find a place to live. And so I was very pleased, and one of ours is Wake Robin, and they are a pretty large employer and they're struggling, and you know, they are definitely interested in figuring out ways to build more housing that could then hopefully benefit their employment members.
Yeah, we have a lot of national level employers that like Walmart's not gonna help us.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are other ones there. Did either of you have any thoughts on, talking about having a conversation in the community on, beyond talking with other groups in town? And what
Yeah.
you say, and meet with your employers and meet with your,
Yeah, we've taught, we haven't done it yet, but we were planning on holding some workshops, that's in the next year or so to, help folks that maybe are interested in an ADU, how do you go about doing that in Shelburne, similar to what SJ, we didn't do a survey, but we did reach out to folks in town that have developed or are considering it. And so we have like some ancillary information from them on, why they were doing it, we were trying to raise awareness on it, because a lot of people don't really know what ADU stands for. So, you got to throw in all the different, in-law apartment and all those different ideas. And, but it helped to, I think, bring about, get people thinking about, oh yeah, I mean, I could totally build an accessory place, and I could move in there, and I could rent out my house, or my kids could live in my house as they're, starting their family, and I could live in the smaller, things that maybe not everyone would think about. So we tried to raise some awareness, and we did that. Or initially, the outreach was through Front Porch Forum, and then we created another page on the website. It's strictly about accessory dwelling units. But communication, that really education is gonna be something we want that housing task force to do for us. And we envision that being some, conversations where inviting public in to talk about it. Because, I feel like the term affordable throws in, it can mean so many different things. And so we really need to get everybody on the same page on what they're looking for. And I think you guys are in the same boat. It's not necessarily you want all the low income housing to happen. You want housing for a diverse cross section of people, right? You want to have all different types. And I think that is a big education piece. Because I think when a lot of people, when they hear the word affordable, they're just like, no, don't want it, Section 8, that means terrible, and
right,
so like, I think that we really need to try and raise the awareness or get everyone on the same playing field of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking about that communication piece. One thing that the South Burlington Committee started doing, which I think it's been effective, is to start a book club, which sounds it sounds weird, but like started with, I think The Color of Law.
yeah, there are a lot of books that
And
they.
then read the, like,
Yeah.
Fixer Upper, and it's interesting because when community members come together and they read the book and they agree
Mhm.
about these like
really
concepts
great
in the
Yeah.
ideal sense. And then you start talking about, well, how would we make that happen here?
Mhm.
Then people realize, oh, okay, well, that would take, certain practical
Right,
actions on the part of the municipality and community support for certain things.
I think that, last spring, wasn't it during Fair Housing Month that, there was either one or two discussions about, a book. Was it about Evicted? I wanna say it's about that book Evicted. But that was like sort of similar.
Yeah.
It was like a book discussion.
I don't think it's quite that
amazingly
bad, 'cause it-
effective, actually, just because it's not,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like SJ was saying, it's a little less scary when you first start thinking about these concepts a little more abstractly. Then
right.
then you gotta capitalize on that and get people to do the rest of the work and start thinking about how you could apply some of those beneficial actions to your community.
I mean, the other thing, I don't know whether anybody has seen Communities and Consequences. Have you? Anyway, it's old. It's like, it's a two-part, documentary series that was produced by a group in New Hampshire. And the first one came out in, I wanna say, 2006 or something, 2007. But it's like you watch it and it's just, they're just talking to people in these towns and. You know, some of them were like, you know, sort of anti, I don't know. Spending money on a new school or anti, housing, and then others were just like. Well, I have to move because I can't afford to live here anymore, and you know, anyway, so it's like those kinds of conversations, but it was like. Made you realize like, yes, this was happening, this, you know, the same stuff that we're seeing now started back in 2005. And then I haven't watched the second series yet, but showing like a film like that, even though it is, you know, it may seem like it's dated, but we're still dealing with the same issues. And having a discussion about it, I think would be another kind of thing.
Has your committee countered the NIMBY mentality at all? or-
No.
Not in Vermont.
I liked SJ's YIMBY. I
Yeah.
like that idea. Yeah, Shelburne had, there's a piece of property, it's like 5 or 6 acres, right off of Shelburne Road. That is all wooded right now, and the people that owned it were selling it, and they had a developer that was gonna build like apartments, there was gonna be like 80 new units, and, the neighborhood there was just like, no, it can't go there because we're all single family homes and, you know, it can't. And so it's now tied up in the courts,
Oh,
and
my.
it's just the latest example of NIMBYism in town, and so, it's created, for the planning commission, they, with the zoning rewrite, they have more attendance than they've ever had before, you know, really, which is good, you know, it's good, but it's hard because some of those in attendance are constantly pushing against any change that would encourage more development. And the idea of getting the conservation and natural resources groups and the housing talking is a great one. Natural resource conservation is also another task force that was born out of our Shelburne Forward Together. And there is definitely interest in trying to bring those two, you know, making sure these two committees like work together, you know, going forward, because they don't have to be exclusive.
Right.
And, you know, I think in our town, we have that Shelburne Road corridor is like, to me, seems like the perfect place for development and infill and everything. And then we've got, you know, the rural area, which should, you know, there's gonna be some development, but maybe we focus more on the core area along Shelburne Road, because that's where our water and sewer is, that's where the bus is, you know, we have everything right there. So, you know, we shouldn't be butting heads, and hopefully we can work together. And
Yeah, we've had the same situation in South Burlington, definitely on Dorset Street, and same properties, just there now, like one property was fairly close really to like the Kennedy Drive 189 intersection, and that property was going to be, I can't remember, maybe 60 homes, large property, right in the middle of others, you know, other subdivisions, large home subdivisions around it. And then that was in the courts for many years, and now it is 9 big homes instead.
yeah,
So yeah, that happens in South Burlington. That was that's the single biggest challenge, I think, for local housing committee work. And trying to figure out how to move forward in those situations, because I actually think that the biggest levers the municipality has are the zoning and planning ordinances, and there is so much fear of change that it was really eye-opening when I first started this local work in South Burlington, because I was so excited about these like thinking about these zoning regulations through a housing lens and all the benefit that could come from some more, less exclusionary zoning and opening up some more possibilities for housing near jobs and services. And then the pushback was like, I just hadn't experienced it before, so it was a real like initiation. I'd also not lived in a place with local government, with such powerful local government before. I've lived in other states where county governments are much more, like involved in in land use. And so it was shocking, it was a big educational experience for me. But it's just creates even more of a opportunity to really have to connect with people and to bring the discussion to what do you want your community to be? What do you want it to be going forward? And instead of the fear of change, what about the fear of not changing? Like, do you really want homelessness to continue increasing? I mean, we simply just do not have enough homes for all the people that want to live here. So homelessness will continue to increase. Our grandkids won't be able to live here. Our adult kids certainly won't be able to consider living here. And so it's a big trade-off, but I think if we can figure out the right way to communicate that and talk about that in a non-threatening way, I guess.
I was a business owner in my previous life, and the whole idea about not being able to grow, like the companies that are around here that are talking about, well, we'll have to set up something in South Carolina because you can't bring people in here. I mean, who is our next generation gonna work for, outside of the next? So to me, that really, what will be the economic makeup here in 10 years if all of our local companies that are successful enough to grow are like, oh, we can't grow here, we're gonna open in
somewhere in the south where it's easier.
Yeah, and it does hit the residents.
Yeah, OnLogic did that, right? OnLogic has had great success, but they had to open like in South Carolina. Right?
Did they really?
Yeah, like,
There's a building now.
Huge building. Right, but I mean, there were jobs that they opened a second office, and I'm like, no, I mean, if they're successful, we want them here.
Yeah, definitely.
A local business here in Williston opened up, another manufacturing plant in Virginia. Because they can't expand here.
Yeah.
It does hit the residents eventually, like I know in Woodstock, some residents were, they realized, oh my gosh, the grocery store is only open 2 days a week, or, there's nobody in the dentist's office, because people couldn't afford to live near their jobs. And so that community, that's motivated them a bit, that community, to do a few more things to try to create some housing choices.
Boy, that's a long way to go to realize that, like, to have like your grocery store only be open 2 days a week. For the town, it take that long for folks to come around to it. It's.
So tell me about your housing trust fund, because we have just a baby one beginning, but.
We don't have one.
Yeah, I mentioned we have, each of those towns has one, but they haven't figured out how to, nor they, I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether this is on the work plan for South Burlington, but in Winooski, I don't think it's quite on the work plan yet in terms of like creating an ongoing source of funding. They want to see how well the programs that the town has created to use the money, how well those are gonna be running right now. There hasn't been it's been hard to get those programs up and running to use the Winooski Trust Fund money. But I think it's gonna take off soon, and then they'll probably think about how to refund it, although those programs are mostly loans, so technically there should be it'll be a revolving loan fund. So even with some seed money, you can create some you can create a loan fund, but again, the ones that I'm familiar with are pretty small. Burlington's is actually really interesting. I think I guess that might be a role model, because they've got like an ongoing source of money. And I think
that's through this payment in lieu or what's their?
I don't remember what the funds are. It's fees for something, or is it from the, property taxes?
I feel like they have, they have, some money out of their property
I
taxes.
think you're
goes into
exactly
their-
right.
Goes into their housing trust fund. Plus their payment and road fee.
But I guess-
Share zoning, yeah, they get enough money, I think, to make a little more, make a bit of a difference, but even small amounts, just kind of get a community involved more in and supportive of the local development. It's
Well, give me an example though, because these are such small amounts. So it would be brilliant if you could have a small amount and have that be a catalyst for something big to happen, but you're sounding like a developer shows up and you mentioned
when
gap
it would happen
loan.
anyway. Like you get
Yeah.
the gap money somewhere else.
Yeah, or maybe if I turn the question around, if there is state funding for this kind of housing, does a town having a trust fund help?
And
Helps
because, well,
in-
the gap money has to come from somewhere,
Mhm.
and so everything and that can be done to help the developer close the gap between the development costs and the anticipated revenue stream from rents, is helpful, and when a town can step forward, my understanding is like when these financing packages are getting put together, a town can come forward and say, we're gonna commit $100,000 to this development early on. It is instrumental, even though it's a small amount of money and it costs at least $400,000 to develop an
Yeah.
apartment in each of these units.
Yeah.
When the town comes forward and puts it and is able to commit some of the funds, my understanding is that it's really helpful, and I'm not exactly sure why, because it doesn't seem like a whole lot of money, but it's helpful because you come in first, you've supported the development, even with a small financial commitment, and then with public support for the project, so.
Yeah, that probably helps going to the bank for a loan.
What's that?
Going for a loan or one of these applications for other funds.
Yeah, exactly.
This
You list the-
community is behind this.
Exactly.
Cause you don't want these 2 or 3 year delays in the trips to the court, yeah,
Yeah.
so if the community's behind it, it might help the other revenue streams.
Yeah.
So that's just another way the community shows support.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a town's conservation fund. right?
Yeah.
Right,
Yep.
exactly. The Williston's ERF, funding is, it's been instrumental in acquiring a lot of, conserved lands and, I think it's leveraged, for every dollar of the fund, it's leveraged $2 in grant funds, so that's pretty good.
Now, how does both your conservation fund and the housing fund, how is it funded? Is it part of the annual budget? Is it voted on? Or is it locked in?
It's part of the budget process and it varies from year to year. Some years there's money put into the ERF. Other years, some years no money, other years less money, some years more money. The same with the Housing Trust Fund. And Housing Trust Fund was created later, much later. And I think there's like $60,000 or something. So, yeah, so that's, there's not there's no guaranteed funding. It's just a
Right.
year-to-year process.
Was there any pushback? I'm asking because Shelburne, I was sort of pushed away from the idea of a housing trust fund by some of the staff at Shelburne town offices because we have it's an open space fund, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And it used to be a specific line item in our annual vote. Now I think it's more rolled into the budget.
Yeah.
So I think there's less controversy around it. It's just part of the budget, but it seemed like it was always a big push and hard sell. And I think that's why I was kind of deterred, against trying to do a housing trust fund because the open space one is already there and people don't like it sometimes and, but yet it's definitely helped the Conservation Commission be able to purchase quite a bit of land.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it's time to revisit it, but we've always sort of been encouraged not to go for it.
But
I
isn't
should-
it, oh, sorry.
So I should be able to explain it better, but I can't really, but when they did the inclusionary zoning in Williston, you know, if the developer builds,
Mhm.
he needs to build, 15% or 20% affordable homes. If he does not build those affordable homes, the penalty is, the town came up with a penalty that he has to pay that housing
The
fund.
payment,
Oh,
payment in
interesting.
lieu,
Oh.
and that goes in the trust fund,
Right.
Okay.
but we'll have to see whether or not that actually.
Yeah.
Gets us any funding,
It's
but
not something that's new, so we're just
Mhm.
going through
Right.
it now.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But I think it's a good tool to raise money.
Yeah.
Coming up with, the fee that they have to pay is,
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, how,
Hard to know.
you
I
don't,
mean-
wanna make it so
Right,
that the developer then walks away and doesn't wanna build.
Right, yeah.
You gotta find that fine balance between.
Gotta keep those one or two builders in your town, right?
exactly, yeah.
Yep, yep.
It's a way to grow, it's a way, that if they don't build affordable homes, then they put money into the housing fund.
Mhm.
Is that where the 60,000 has come from so far?
No, that was, prior to what Mike was, referring to was the recent,
Okay.
inclusionary
Gotcha,
zoning,
gotcha.
the town adopted.
Yeah.
So that's going to, result in probably some payment in lieu fees, we don't know how much. But the 60,000 was just, that was, allocations, budgetary allocations from year to year. That's that. Yeah. But you're, yeah. But I mean, you're right, like it is, there's something that can be sort of controversial about these. Certain amounts, penny on the tax rate or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's less controversial in some ways if it's part of the budgetary process. So
Yeah.
I see
Yeah.
that. Where that comes from. For sure.
I think that's all the questions that were on our list. Did you have any other?
I'm sure Melinda's aware of it, but the Regional Planning Commission hosts housing convening meetings. Have you guys?
I haven't done those yet, but that's.
There's like I think it's like one a quarter maybe, or
Yeah.
sometimes it works. It's probably more like 3 times a year. I don't know if it happens. They usually try and find like the 5th Monday of the month or something, so like.
One of those extra days.
Yeah, so that, it's not stepping on any committee's monthly meeting time.
That's clever.
But that's a great place to get, hear about what other housing committees are doing, and they always bring in professionals, developers, other towns, we'll talk about, a specific, like we've had specific topics, like inclusionary zoning was one, and so like, Heinsberg talked about theirs, Burlington talked about theirs, so it's kind of nice to get that input from other,
There you go, yeah, you're looking them up.
Yeah,
Oh,
those are
yeah.
super, super, super helpful.
and then the state has started something as well, right? It's,
Oh,
Yeah.
the CBOEOs, thriving
Yes.
communities.
Yeah.
Group,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've actually gone back and watched some of these
Yeah.
and I'd actually strongly recommend watching the Economics of Housing Summit. There's 4 videos. They're each pretty short. They're like 15 minutes. But I learned a whole lot from just watching those. Just about how. But anyway, yeah, tremendous resource here.
What
for
was the
sure.
date on it?
Where's that link again, Melinda?
So,
January.
It's on the
if
regional
you go
planning
to,
commission.
CCRPC, and then just go to their housing page, and it's the housing convenings.
It's ccrpcvt.org, so Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, Vermont.
Yeah,
VT.
I can put it in
.org.
Then we also, that's here in Chittenden County, for the entire state, there's this housing data website that
Yes,
SJ
which is awesome.
mentioned, and as part of the housing data, which is literally housingdata.org.
Mhm.
Somehow we got that
Yeah, that's
like
crazy.
20 years ago. And so that website has both a bunch of data about, even at the town level, about housing, about the housing that's here, the people that are here, and how those two mesh together. And then, there's another part of the site that's called the Housing Ready Toolbox, and it has a ton of information about, local levers and educational materials for housing committees, and even information about, y'all don't need to know how to form a housing committee, but it's really meant to like help communities who are just getting started, learn about what they can do as a housing committee and how they can help housing affordability locally. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and that Housing Ready Toolbox was developed in collaboration with, what Pam was talking about, which is the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity has a Fair Housing Thriving Communities project, and they collaborated with us, as did the state's planning office, and we created this Housing Ready Toolbox. It's gonna get a refresh soon, but it's got a lot of really good stuff in there, a lot of good material.
Mhm.
And the statewide stuff. But these housing convenings are amazing, because you get a chance to hear about from the chairs of, like, usually there's some representative from each of the housing committees on the call, or, we used to meet in person, and they'll just talk about what they're working on. So it's just, it's been really helpful, I think, to.
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant not to reinvent the wheel. Well, we're all like, we're all doing the same thing here. Great. Well, I appreciate your time. I think we have another agenda item, but you probably wanna let you guys get to that, get to dinner or whatever, but thank you. Yeah.
I missed Hunter,
I'll
he
see you
came
next
over to
Tuesday.
visit.
See you later. And I'll get you an email faster.
felt so
Okay.
So definitely, yeah.
Like saw you and then I was like.
Oh, you were busy at your son's wedding? No,
Thank
it's all good.
All right, our next agenda item is collecting housing stories.
Sorry, I
Yeah, no
can't go
worries.
anywhere without this.
So tell me about this.
Oh, so, my hope was we'd have a quorum tonight. And since we didn't, I asked Steve to just come back to,
Okay.
to another meeting, but yeah, I can just fill you in briefly. Steve Shepherd is on the planning commission, and he's also, tremendously talented, storyteller, writer, podcast, producer. And, he, I had a thought, well, you mentioned collecting stories and sharing stories. So I had a thought that maybe we could work with Steve.
Oh,
To
great.
do that. And I mentioned it, just as an idea, as I just said, I haven't run this past the housing committee yet, but would you be interested in like doing a podcast of, housing stories or something? Cause he has his newest podcast is, oh God, it's focused on Williston. Maybe I can,
Oh, really?
it's called, let's see, I can pull it up. Williston, Old Town. Shoot. Old Town Charm.
Oh, yeah, you put it,
New
actually, you
Town
put it on the
Spirit.
agenda. Old
Oh,
Town
okay, all right, I can.
Charm
I
and
just-
New Town Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
let me see, all right, let me see, I'll share.
Sounds like a 4th of July t-shirt logo.
I think you guys are gonna enjoy having Steve Shepherd in your group.
Be fun.
He's fascinating.
He is.
Yeah, so this is his newest thing. He's, where's some of that?
One thing, Williston brings a lot of interest, cool people in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
he
yeah,
started
that's
doing
fun.
some podcasts, welcome to Williston,
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Chittenden, all these things, so. It's just interesting, and I think he does his podcast really well too, like. I don't know, just check it out, listen.
Yeah, communicating is a, yeah, so,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I like the idea if anyone knows how to communicate, I love it.
They had a lot of, Esther had a lot of ideas about bringing people sort of in.
Mhm.
I mean, one thing I didn't
that
understand,
educating thing.
one thing I didn't understand is even if you convince the select board to set goals, the town doesn't really have that much control over. I mean, even if you look at it, all the work that was done, how many new units are gonna be built? It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's not really in the town. I mean, I ran a business, like I said, I'm all for setting goals, but it has to be a goal that you have some control over. So, as a
Yeah.
town, you can set an environment where hopefully folks wanna do what you want them to do, you know, or set things up.
Mhm.
So it's interesting.
Seems
But-
like they worked a lot on several different
Yeah,
avenues of getting people to,
yeah, and maybe these goals aren't, I mean, I need to
Yeah,
read them,
that
I'm
seems to be a
envisioning that they,
later
you know,
thing.
did they say, we want 20 new houses that are at, you know,
Mhm.
at the average median, or, you know, were the
Well,
goals
and-
that solid, or were they more like,
Right,
you
and,
know, if somebody wants to build here, we wanna help
Yeah.
them, or.
and keep that in mind that, I mean, I sort of, yeah, I'd be interested in looking what those goals were. and
Yeah.
What the resolution is, but keep in mind also that, you know, that CCRPC is gonna be establishing those housing targets for all the towns in the region.
Oh, that's right, and they'll give us some nice
So that-
data too,
That's sort of more like specific. I don't know if you were aware of this, but
yeah,
the state has, basically authorized, the regional planning commissions to be housing navigators for their communities. So part of, I guess, and part of what that means is kind of looking at where there's opportunities for new housing in communities and establishing some sort of, targets for different income levels of housing in each town.
It's all complicated.
were they
And
even
it's-
gonna look at like parcels of land though, cause
I
we
think
looked
they
at.
were, yeah. they
Cause we were looking, there's a South Burlington report where they kind
Yeah.
of listed all their parcels and said these would be the most attractive for affordable housing, and he was
That's-
saying they would have something. comparable,
Yeah,
right?
that, they're gonna do some of that, I think, and, and also probably work with, staff here to do that, but,
that was one thing South Burlington ran into though, was then Act 100 went through, or Act 47 it is,
Okay,
and that changed
oh, yeah,
a lot of the
Right.
zoning stuff that, so I read an article that they're really having to rework after having made all
Mhm.
those
yeah,
decisions.
well, we have to rework some of our stuff too.
yeah, we've been working on that to, basically rework our zoning so that it aligns with state requirements.
And it's kind of like matching terminology, right?
Yeah.
Because we talk about a dwelling unit differently than they do, so it's not,
Yeah,
I'm
right,
not, it's,
right,
it's just getting them to align.
yeah, Yeah.
It takes money to make money, and right now going over the budget makes it's really difficult.
yeah,
You know, we have a large budget increase and, but it takes money to create development as well.
mhm,
It also takes money for, you know, public safety and a lot of other factors.
yeah, I know, I don't envy your job in that respect, you know, it's tough.
I'm not a bean counter, I can't.
You
Yeah,
kept a
that's
farm
right.
going though, you had to do, you know, you had to keep a bunch of things in line, right, to run any kind of
Yes.
business, so even if you. I mentor a lot of businesses, and I feel like you have an intuition in when you run a business, cause you have to pay people, you know, you need money at certain times. So,
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's-
it's not easy.
yeah, but you probably bring some good intuition,
Mm. Yeah,
So I hope so.
yeah. Well, then are we done? Should we, any
Um,
motion to adjourn, or?
yeah, I think, you know.
Was there anything?
Discussing
Yeah.
anymore.
No, I got
What were
a,
you gonna say?
I was just saying, was there anything that anybody saw that they thought was outstanding or?
well, I like the idea of meeting with our developers, I mean, we have, what, 3 big developers?
Right, yeah,
So, I mean, I probably wanna approach them with the right consideration, something you'd want to think about, but I'm sure they have opinions, so it'd be good to know those.
Yeah, for sure.
I liked the, getting some data and facts like we have
Mhm.
from the needs assessment and, having a table at town meeting, having a table at the farmer's market or the 4th of July or whatever. 'Cause
Yeah.
Seems like people really need the education.
Yeah. Mhm.
What type of measurements we need, what measurements, what are we measuring for improvement or
Right.
going backwards?
Mhm.
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 Well, and also finding out what people that she was saying, connect with people's stories.
Yeah.
Do you have, we want to build affordable housing. Does affordable housing mean that your kid can then buy a house here and
Mhm.
can they buy one now or not?
I talked to a lot of older Willistonites and, they're getting to the point where they can't afford to live here anymore, and that's,
Mhm.
And there's nowhere to downsize. Somebody said
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
You have multi-generations in your house, right? I mean, do you consider, do you consider your house an ADU or do you consider it? I mean,
like my parents live in one, in a portion of it, and I live in a portion of it.
so you've already thought that through, right? I mean,
Right.
what other people are saying, which is I have a bigger house and I need to subdivide it.
It used to be really two houses and, used to be like, there's always 2 generations living there.
So you guys have been thinking about this for,
And so then when
100 years.
one generation of,
right?
several decades ago passed away, we took part of the house and converted it into 2 more units. So it's
Right.
now 4 units.
Yeah, so same thing. You were just way ahead.
Well, that's what they say though, is that a lot of the zoning where instead of having 2 acres, you have a house.
Mhm.
But in the towns, the small towns and the villages, they didn't have 2 acres with one house. They had one house and they had extended it, so it had 3 or
Oh,
4
right, what you're
units.
saying is, yeah, they started off as a
And they
little,
weren't big, huge yards.
right?
And so just pushing the zoning that,
I think we need higher density housing.
well, that new act allows up to 5 units, 5 or more, I think.
Five
On 2 acre, on an
Right.
acre.
On an acre, right, 5 dwelling units per acre.
Per acre.
In the growth section, though, right?
In the part of town that is, served by water and
Yeah.
sewer.
Mhm.
Yeah, for us, that's
Pretty big.
primarily the RZD, and village and tap corners.
Yeah, that's a pretty big chunk though. You
Yeah.
can plow a lot of house. A lot of ADUs or.
Well, I like well, 2 things I'd like, I mean, if we were gonna set goals, but we should talk about that more broadly, but I like the idea of downsizing, because to your point, I think that a lot of people are in bigger houses and they want, but they wanna stay in town, and so they don't have any choices, so,
Mhm.
down. In fact, one thing that makes me crazy a lot of times when they show these I'm on the DRB, when they show these multi-units, is a lot of time they have a 1-bedroom unit, which sounds nice, but it's above a garage. So if you're gonna age there, having a staircase to go upstairs or, any kind of disabilities, it's like, if you wanna downsize to a 1-bedroom, you want it to be main floor.
Yeah.
So we don't get, but also it'd be great if we could have some sort of credit. I mean, if we have these 7,000 retail workers that have to live 2 or 3 towns over, their daily commutes are environmentally not great.
Yeah.
And if they're able to live closer and not have a car or something like that, that's an environmental impact, a good one,
Mhm.
environmental improvement. So their housing, it comes intertwined with a lot of the environmental goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife and I just recently moved from the big section of the farmhouse to one of the smallest sections, and we love it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Blessed to take care.
because then you have someone come in to take care of the farm, like someone else in the family came in. Did you move to a smaller part of the house because the next person to take care of the farm?
Well, we were living in a large apartment. We wanted to remodel a smaller one.
Oh, got
It
it.
wasn't done, so we moved in, and while the remodeling was done, we lived in it. We just rented the larger quarters out to 2 traveling nurses.
Oh, got it.
We love it. We don't wanna go back to the big part of the house now.
So you're ahead of it. This whole thing of dividing the house, you're way ahead on,
Hmm.
even thinking about it.
It feels nice to go from, 2,400 square feet to 800 square feet.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mm.
Absolutely.
When you're young, you're going moving up. You want 20,
Smaller is better,
big
yeah,
place.
yeah.
But it costs more, it's a lot more work to clean and.
Mm-hmm. But it would be great if we could have goals of where people could stay. And Williston, I mean, either by subdividing bigger houses, ADUs or something like that, or other kind of places to relocate. I think there's a lot of people in that situation.
There's smaller families today. People have smaller families.
Mhm.
Older people don't need 3,000 square feet.
Mhm.
Well, does that, I mean, what the census was like 1.75 people per house kind of deal.
Mhm. Yeah.
Nobody's got 10 people in their house anymore,
Yeah.
except refugees.
We have a big farmhouse because my dad was one of 14 children.
Wow.
The farms are always big.
Yeah.
They took care of the elderly at the same time. So
Right.
they needed a
Yeah.
large house.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Marla pointed out, I work with some refugees and they have very big families, so one of them asked me why Americans hate families. But the thing I bring it up because I said, most of us are one or two generations from 10 kids, it's not like we always lived
Right.
with small families, so,
Right.
yeah. All right, so we should adjourn. Do we need a motion? Are we that formal or do we
No.
just, okay.
Well, thank you for
Well, no,
joining me. Wednesday night is usually
I'm
beer
on
and cigar night for me.
Oh, yeah? Do you
Sorry.
have them inside the house or